Oh, there it goes. We're live now. It took a moment there.
As it does.
Click here. Apparently this should give me the link. Maybe it's over here that I have it. They move stuff around on me, Scott, in Ecamm. I don't know where the link went to the live stream. It's out there. Let me go find it a minute while we're live. You can ramble. And I can share this in Discord for anybody that is out there that wants to come watch.
Makes for compelling TV.
I don't know why my link doesn't work. Oh, it's right here. It's a little teeny tiny share. Copy video URL. I found it. You would think we would figure this stuff out. How are levels? Are levels pretty close? Now it's your turn to talk.
Levels, levels, levels. Talking about levels on things streaming to YouTube. How's that?
Perfect. Levels are good. We're good. Here's the link. Anyone that wants to come watch in Discord. Anyone that wishes to see Scott demonstrate the glories of Azure Resource Explorer Live. There we go. It is out there in Discord for anybody that cares to watch sports ball shirts. See sports ball shirts.
Yeah. Yeah, you like my sport ball shirt?
I do like
It's
your
one
sport
of the
ball
new
shirt.
one of the new ones in my collection.
Have you been watching any of the World Cup?
I have not been watching
I
any of
forget
the
because
World Cup.
you played soccer, did you play soccer?
I did way back in high school and grade school
Okay.
and all that. Gave it up in college when I found out that parties were a thing.
You mean parties went out over soccer?
Something like that. All right. Let's
Anyways,
go ahead and get into the wonderful world of Azure Resource Explorer, which is quite possibly one of my favorite undocumented gems of Azure.
yes.
And I think there's a lot of confusion about it. And when I say Azure Resource Explorer to you, you might think of something completely different than the tool that I'm actually talking about.
Yeah, and we have talked about this in the past, and I was going to flip over to my monitor and we were going to read all the documentation, but lo and behold, there is none. The
There,
documentation is officially
yeah.
non-existent for Azure Resource Provider. So, or Azure Resource Explorer.
Azure Resource Explorer. Yep, we're
Yes.
going to fly blind on this one. So
All
I'm,
right.
I'm excited to introduce you to it. It'll probably be a quick one, but I think like there's a ton of power in this tool, so it's worth spending at least a few minutes on.
All right. So, since there's no documentation and you are going to be the one doing it, I'm going to flip over to your wonderful screen here. And are we going to go to Azure Resource Explorer in the Azure portal?
Yeah, so the first place we're going to start is the Azure portal. Makes sense, right? Like we want to browse for Azure resources. So I think most of us are used to this experience. Like hopefully we've all been in the portal at this time. I can do things like browse into my resource groups, or I can look for maybe a specific class of resource. Like I'm interested in looking at just storage accounts
Yep.
that exist out there. So you can do this and you can have this kind of experience where you go resource by resource. I have a storage account here. I can click into that storage account and I can maybe do things like check resource health. I can open a support request. I have basic functionality, be able to do things like generate templates for deployments. Like let's go ahead and export a template out for a given resource or a resource group, set of resources, whatever it happens to be. I can also do things in here. Like if I go to my subscriptions and I look at my subscription here, I can also see resource groups on this level. Like these experiences are kind of repeated throughout Blades, things like that. I can see resource providers. So we'll give this just a second to render here. So say I was interested in Azure Advisor, and I just wanted to see what Azure Advisor could do. It has API versions. I can see the capabilities of it, the locations it's available. And I have this kind of little JSON view of it kind of thing. And I have a resource browser for it as well, or I guess resource types. So these are kind of like the endpoints within the resource provider. Like if you're thinking about constructing a REST API request, that can respond to things. So within Azure Advisor, there's this class of things called operations. And within operations, I can do certain things. I can do things like call, generate recommendations to kick off regenerating my recommendations, all that kind of stuff. But I think this is it's a little bit of a disjointed experience. Like I had to know where to go to do all those things. So I had to know that resource providers exist over here in the subscriptions blade, or to get my storage accounts, go look for storage accounts, things like that. Like it's not an all-in-one shopping experience, which is where Resource Explorer can help a little bit. So I'm just going to go back to the homepage of the portal here, and I'm going to search for Resource Explorer and pull that up. And this takes me to this pretty kind of bland blade
I was gonna say this
experience.
is kind of boring. Like you go to this and there's nothing there. You can see a white page with providers and subscriptions.
Right. So, but if we start diving into it, so I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to come to resource groups, and it's going to spit back all this JSON at me. But if you pay attention to the little text box here, what it's actually doing is it's calling that API endpoint within ARM. So ARM has an API endpoint where I can browse by subscription ID and return a list of all resource groups. So when you're in tooling, maybe like the CLI or Azure PowerShell, say I do like a get AZ resource group, and it returns the list of all the resource groups. Really, what it's doing under the hood is it's making a call to this REST endpoint, authenticated as whatever user you're authenticated in, and say PowerShell at that time. It's getting a JSON response back, and it's parsing it and pushing it down to the screen for you. But I can dive all the way into the resource level. So let me go back to my resource group, and maybe I want to go in there and I want to see the resources that are actually deployed in there. And back to that whole like template export experience, like this is just doing like a get properties basically like on that resource through a given resource provider. So I know I'm interacting with the Microsoft.storage resource provider, and I've got this endpoint in here of Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. And then within there, I've got this storage account called scHogue, and I can just see all the properties available with it. I can browse deployments through here. So if I've ever done a deployment on this account, like an actual ARM template deployment,
Uh huh.
or in many cases, when you've executed commands through tooling like the CLI or PowerShell, things like that, those are basically ARM expression generators. They're going to generate that template for you and actually push that deployment out as well. Plane. That's a loud one. Um, so I can actually go ahead and like just kind of burst through this way, which is pretty nice. Like if I'm more inclined to do things like ARM deployments, maybe I'm doing ARM templates and ARM template creation, or I just want to see how to create a template. Like, hey, I'm really interested in something like a network watcher and understanding like what the various components of a network watcher interface look like. What do I maybe need to do to stand one of those up? Log analytics, same thing. I've got a log analytics resource deployed over here. I can do a get properties against that. So if I wanted to create one of these on my own, sometimes what I'll do is I'll skip the export experience directly in the portal, and I'll just come into something like Resource Explorer. You can also browse providers. So back to that example earlier of I was looking at Azure Advisor.
Uh
We'll
huh.
give it a second to render out here while it
So
spins.
while
But
that's
I can
loading,
see all the resource providers. Yep. Sorry.
okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say keep going with that, and then I have a question.
Sure. So let's do the same thing. Let's go into Azure Advisor. So we're in the portal, and I was in the subscription blade, and I potentially had a little bit of that disjointed experience where it was like a drop down where I needed to hop through all of the operations that were available on a given resource provider. In this case, I can come here. I can come to Azure Provider. I can come to the resource provider, Microsoft dot advisor in this case, and I can see all of the things, basically all of the endpoints or all of the operations that I can run within this resource provider. I can see things like the API versions that are available to me, all the capabilities across all these operations, things like that. So it is a much quicker way, I think, to just come through and kind of get quick access to that information. If I'm down in something like a resource, like let me go back into one of my storage accounts here. I've got this little open blade button. I can click that. It takes me immediately over to the resource. Like I can kind of have one stop shopping through something like Resource Explorer versus having to go here, go here, go here, go here in the Azure portal.
Yeah, so this is kind of nifty. This is not the question I was going to ask, but I was looking through this as you're talking about it. Um, and even looking at like Microsoft.compute. I know sometimes when I go stand stuff up, you're always curious about locations or even things like availability sets. And by going to like Microsoft.compute, you can, it's a quick, easy way to figure out all the locations that maybe support availability sets or all the locations that support availability zones and those different aspects of virtual machines that maybe aren't supported in all the different regions.
Yep. You can also see API versions. So if you're interested in doing an API override, it'll let you know which versions are valid. It will also show you the default API version, which I think is good to know if you're constructing these URIs yourself, like from the command line. So, like in this case, I can see that the default API version for Microsoft.compute slash availability sets is 2021-07-01, but I can actually see the API that was run wasn't even running against the default version. It was running against 2019-08-01. So if I wanted to go play with those in tooling someplace, I could potentially go and run both of those and see the differences between them.
Very nifty. So I did have a question, and this was the question I originally had, is you have the search box at the top. And I was playing with this a little bit while you were talking. And this does not appear to be a very fully functional search box. And it's actually like when I'm searching for it, the only thing it actually pulls back for me is resource groups. Although in a like it's not pulling back everything I would expect. When I search for resources that I know, for instance, have demo in the name somewhere, the only thing it's pulling back is my demo resource groups. It looks like maybe it's only searching. It's not even searching a begins with. Like I'm trying to figure out how the search box actually functions.
Not very well. I don't consider this a tool for like this is something like maybe you want like that everything and you can eat it too kind of experience, or you know what you're going to dive into hierarchically. Because if I look at this, like really what I'm doing is I'm walking the ARM API in this case. Like if I go into subscriptions, I have a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. Within that subscription, I have resource groups or I have resource providers there too. Like I've deployed storage accounts in this subscription. So I can actually go into the storage resource provider and then I can see just a constrained view of all the storage accounts that I've deployed out that way. But you do have to know to a certain degree what you're looking for.
Right? Like I tried to search for Microsoft.compute, thinking maybe it would show me what even take me to the resource provider that it's in. And Microsoft.compute gives me no resources found. I can
Yeah,
search for Microsoft.
I think it searches resource name, and then returns back artifacts from within. the various resource providers that you have deployed, like anything that has a wild card match. So like I have a resource group out here called demo. So if I
Uh-huh.
search for demo, it takes me to that resource group, and then I can click it and quickly get to it.
Yeah. So don't trust that search box to search for more stuff. Like you said, it's geared a lot more towards walking through stuff than actually searching and finding anything.
I would throw that statement, like I would turn that around a little bit. This
Okay.
is a tactical tool. It is not a strategic tool for you. So you're not going in here to do discovery. You're going in here to do surgery, kind of thing. Like you're going to be very targeted and already know where you want to land, or you're going to have a sense of what you want to do. Like if you know you want to walk the Microsoft.compute resource provider, great,
Uh-huh.
dive into providers here and pull up Microsoft.compute. If you don't know the compute resource provider is a thing, go read the documentation and then come back over here
And then
and
come
spend some
back
time
and
in this tooling. Yep.
so I can't go in here and figure out what Microsoft.ag food platform is.
I mean, if you want to go around and play with the food platform, you certainly can.
I've never heard of that
Welcome
before.
to Farm Beats. Yeah.
Huh. Yep, no idea what Farm Beats is.
The agriculture platform's a real thing. Um,
Yeah.
but
So
anyway, yeah. Sorry, what was your question
I was gonna say, so
or
this
observation?
shows like a lot of walking through stuff. This is Azure Resource Explorer and the Azure Resource Portal, but there's also another Azure Resource Explorer. Did you want to dive into that, or was there more you were gonna say on this one?
No, so I think that's enough for this experience. Like it's pretty straightforward. But let's go take a look at a little bit of a different one. So now I'm going to go to resources.azure.com. And this is a site that has existed since 2015, 2016.
Has it been
It's
in
been out there
preview for
for,
the last 7 years?
yeah, it's been out there quite some time. Let's just say like its legacy, but it gives me a very similar view. I'm actually going to go ahead and refresh my page here just so I end up in the default experience. It gives me a very similar view to what I had from the Azure portal, but note that I'm in a totally different website right now. So I can do things like browse my subscriptions. Let's go back to our resource groups again. I'll go to my storage demo resource group there, and I can do things like view the resources within it. I can certainly dive into providers, and let's go ahead and let's look at Microsoft.storage. Give this a second to render and do its thing, and we'll look at a storage account. So I can certainly dive through and explore the ARM API surface in the same way. That's all really good, really cool. But there's all these actions up here at the top. So right now I'm in Git mode. I'm basically in a read only mode. So there's this button up here at the top where I can do read only or I can do read write. I recommend everybody come into this tool read only until you know what you're doing. Unless you like very much want to perform a post or a delete operation via a resource provider, like via the storage resource provider, compute resource provider, or just like management.azure.com, whatever, tread lightly here. The other cool thing is when I was in the portal experience, like if I come over here to the portal experience, it never gives me the full URI to this thing to go and run it. Like say I was building my own tool and I was calling the REST API directly.
Yep.
This gives me the full URI. So if I wanted to go run this thing in Postman or something like that, like maybe I use the CLI, retrieve a bearer token, and I want to go run this in Postman, it's just a simple like copy button away for me to be able to get that information and be able to run it. I think that's pretty cool. I can come into documentation here, which just basically kind of crawls all the attributes that are available within the return JSON. But if it's a documented property, you will see the documentation for that property. I think that's pretty cool for when you're going and you're, say, like building your own ARM template, or maybe you're doing bicep, something like that. Like you just want to understand what that thing is and what it does. I can also get Ansible playbooks from here, which is kind of interesting because I can't export Ansible playbooks from the Azure portal. I can only export ARM templates today. So maybe you're doing Ansible, or you're doing like, hey, I want to see how it was done in Ansible because that translates to Terraform a little bit easier for me. Like that's all good, and kind of plays nicely, and looks pretty cool. I've got an edit button here. So if I want to edit this JSON and then perform something like a patch operation, like say I wanted to update, I don't know, something on this resource, on this storage account, I could go make that happen. I can even change the URI here. So back to that API version thing, let's come back over to Resource Explorer. Let's go. So I'm going to go back to the experience here real quick. Come into Microsoft.storage. Let's find a newer API version. Great. So I know 2022-0901 is a newer API version. This is currently running 2017-1001. So if I wanted to, I could theoretically go ahead and change that, and make it whatever I wanted it to be, to be able to go ahead and run it, which is pretty cool. If I put this into read write mode, then I can start to do things like perform post and delete operations. So I get a big button here to delete. I can actually see the endpoint that it's calling when it makes that delete operation, like if I wanted to perform that delete myself. And then I get all these nice little pre-structured JSON bodies that I can immediately post against the service if I wanted to. So if I wanted to go ahead and list all account SaaS, I can go ahead and click that and run it, and it's not going to work for me because I haven't formatted the JSON the right way. But it's all just a button click away from me, which I think is a pretty powerful thing. If I come back to storage accounts, so when I'm down here at the storage level, the create button is grayed out, not available to me. But if I come to storage accounts and I go to create, it's actually going to just spin up a default empty template for me.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
this is what ARM expects when I submit that deployment. So if you were, say, building an ARM template and you wanted to figure out like maybe like what's the min surface for me to deploy resource X, resource Y, resource Z, whatever it is,
Yep.
you just come in here and spin this up. Like you're now, don't get me wrong, you're gonna have to go read some documentation, right, to figure out like what all these various things are and what they mean, but it's all available to you, and it's just a button click away. So say I wanted to come in here, and this is a live text box here, so if I wanted to update this, like I know like standard LRS is a valid thing, so I could come in and I could make that go. And then once I had this all set, like say I did it in like an editor someplace else, I can just click put, and because I'm in read write mode, it'll execute that put request, and push it through to the other side for me, which is pretty nifty.
Yeah. So if you're trying to do this in this scenario and you push put and have an error, does it spit back like meaningful errors about this is wrong format or this is not a valid value or anything like that? Or is it a pretty, what's that experience like if you put something in there wrong and you need to try to figure out what you did wrong or need to fix?
So it doesn't spit anything back to you. Like let me come down to this storage count again. So I'm just going to run this list account SaaS like with nothing formatted the right way in it,
Yeah.
and you'll see it just comes back with the little icon there. So
Okay.
all it did was I aired out, and I'm not ready to go.
So if you're doing a
Uh,
create, it would do the same type of thing. It would just kind of show a little exclamation mark and
yep,
say, "Yeah, go fix something. Go figure it
yep.
out and fix it."
In this experience, yes. So a couple things. You've got a search box up here as well. I never use this thing. Like first time I've ever clicked on it, doesn't even work. Your mileage may vary when it comes to that.
Oh,
But
my
let's take
search
a
box
look.
worked way better. My search box here works way better than it does in the
Oh, there it goes. Now it's
portal.
taken off. Oh yeah, look at that. Isn't that nifty?
Yeah, mine like found all kinds of resources that the Azure portal one didn't.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, so I've never actually used that search box there at all. Like I said, I consider this to be like a surgical kind of tool. All
Yeah.
right, so I'm going to go back to read only mode here, and I kind of want to show you some other fun things that you can do in this experience. So I'm going to come back to storage accounts here. And let's take a look at what's going on. So I am calling Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. If I come back up here to the portal, I can see that, yep, there is definitely a thing here called storage accounts that I can go ahead and call. So that's all cool. I'm going to copy this URL, and then I'm going to go to resources.azure.com/raw, RAW. And what this is, back to your whole what happens if I submit that and there's an error kind of thing, like how does it come back and compose for me? This is a kind of minimum viable product for you to submit raw REST API requests to management.azure.com. The cool thing is it already has all of the context for who I am. So from an authentication perspective, when I do something like run a get or a post or a put from here, it's actually going to already know who I am. It's got the bearer token. It can submit that as part of the request. So I'm authenticated in this experience, which I think is super powerful. So if I want to do something like I want to do a get subscriptions, I just come in and highlight the line I want to run, and I hit Control+S, and then it does a get subscriptions. And this will show you like how old this website is now I can see the status. Like that was an HTTP call that aired out with an HTTP 400. It let me know that I used an invalid API version. So now we can do something like maybe come in here and let's try that request again, but now it's all editable, right? This is just a big
Yep.
text box for me to do. So I'm going to go ahead and run that again with a valid API version, and then boom, I'm off to the races and I'm running. Like it's given me that information back. It's told me like the content encoding for the request. Like if I was interested in any optional headers that were submitted, like header responses, like all that stuff's available to me. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Like let's get a resource group. So I want to go get a resource group, and I can do that. Like again, I see it's an HTTP 200. It gave me all the information that I wanted. It gives me all the IDs with the full formatted URI in them, which is pretty cool. Like I think like this is a really awesome way to be able to browse the API. But let me go back over to that site. So back to that, the whole URI is here. I'm
Yep.
going to go just click the copy button and grab that. And if I come over, I'll go down to the bottom here. I want to do. So I'm going to paste that in. So that's just the raw paste of what I had. And I know that's a GET request. So I want to run a GET request on that. Let's go ahead and highlight that and run it. Hey, great. That was a valid request. And I expected it to be because I ran it over here. But let's go grab another API version. Let's see. So I want to now run this request with 2022-09-01. So I'm going to come down here. I'm just going to change that. Like I want to see if there's any difference between those two APIs and the response that comes back. Highlight that, run it again, and just like that. Like I'm back up and running, and it's given me all that information along the way, which I think is just like the great piece of functionality. Let's see, what else can we do here? What are some other good tips and tricks? So I'm going to go to a storage account here. Some of these types of resources will sometimes have, yep, here we go. So if I go into a deployment, so I'm at this point, I'm browsing past deployments that have happened in this resource group.
Okay.
Now I've got access to the API endpoints for exporting the ARM template. Like if I didn't want to hop to the Azure browser to do that, I've certainly got my delete operation, things like that. I also have the validate operation here. So if you've ever wanted to go ahead and validate a resource or see if your deployment is valid, like this gives you that in a pretty easy to digest form. Check this out. We can also do validate move resources. So let me grab this here. I don't know if you've ever used like the ARM movement APIs. I don't think
I
I
don't
have
know
one
that
of
I have.
these. Resource mover, you know how you can go ahead and move resources
Oh,
around
yep.
kind of thing?
Yep.
Yep. So I want to do a validate move resources, and this is what the API, the response body. So I just put that directly below the request. So let's go find a target resource group. So let's say I've got my storage account, which is just get our let me go back to let's pick another resource group here. Like let me say I wanted to move this resource over to here. I can't exactly remember for this API if it is the just the resource group name or if it's the full thing. And then let's go grab let's go grab a resource name. So I want to take I'm going to take this storage account and let's just pop that in here real quick. So I want to take this storage account and see if it's a valid resource to move from its current resource group over to this other resource group. So I can go ahead, highlight all that, hit Control S, invalid resource group ID, back to that whole I get the error back kind of thing. So let's go ahead and go back to our resource group here. And because it's all just here, hey, great, there's my full ID. Super easy for me to copy and paste and bring over here. And since I know the ID failed, I bet my resource is going to fail as well. So let's just go grab the ID for that resource and we'll pop that in and we'll try and run that again. But super easy to run. Like I'm just structuring the response body directly below that thing. So
Right.
this is cool. Now I hit Control S and I run it, and that's going to go ahead. And what that did was it submitted the job to see if that is going to be a valid move for me. So there's actually, I believe there's a Git on this as well. So once I've submitted that thing, someplace I forget the exact API, but there's a Git command out there that you can run as well, which will tell you the status of these submitted jobs. So you can see, like, hey, where am I at? Like, is this a valid resource to move? Anything like that. Super powerful stuff. Like, if you're looking to just play with the ARM API surface, very specifically like the REST API surface, which is what powers all of Azure.com.
Yeah.
And it's how it's exposed to us as customers and consumers of the platform.
Just don't play with it in production.
I mean,
Disclaimer.
I'm playing with it in production here, but run it in read only mode. Like, I can't stress enough this read only thing up here. Very important. If you have multiple subscriptions, you can flip flop between
Flip.
subscriptions. There's just a little drop down up there at the top.
I saw that. And I did notice too, like if you're in the resources.azure.com/raw and you flip between subscriptions there, it like takes you back to resources.azure.com. It doesn't
Yes.
keep you
Yep.
in that raw experience. So
Yeah, so pick one, kind of stick with it kind of thing. But I use this tool all the time when new functionality comes out and it's not available or not yet built into the CLI or PowerShell.
got it.
Like for you to be able to execute something like through tooling like PowerShell, like to have like a built-in git az blah 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 commandlet. There
Yep.
needs to be support in the resource provider that's called. So realistically, like the development lifecycle for those things is the resource provider is updated, it's pushed out with a new API version. Once that resource provider is available, client tooling can then adopt that new functionality. So it can pick up that new JSON response, that new API version, new resource provider, like whatever it happens to be for you that you're interested in consuming. So sometimes when it's early days for these things, and you'll find this in documentation, like sometimes it'll say like, "Hey, just call this API to make this happen." Just come over to this website and go to that /raw thing, and you can give it a shot and see how it goes.
Yeah, because it's always going to come here first. And I'd also imagine that some of these endpoints, when you look at the API versions and you can see previews of them, those are probably not always available in the CLI or in other interfaces first. So you may be able to get a glimpse at some stuff that's coming or play with some preview stuff by checking out some of those preview APIs as well.
Yep. Some of the tooling gives you the ability to override API versions, like if you did want to talk to a specific API version. But it gets a little bit weird, I think, when you're in common tooling like the CLI or PowerShell, because you're talking about API overrides or using specific API versions at a resource provider level, and even sometimes more specifically at a method within a resource provider. So you could call like I'm going to go back to um, that Microsoft.advisor thing if I ever get this to render out here. We'll see. So if I go back to Microsoft Advisor and I look at the operations that are available to me, theoretically, I could call each one of these with its own distinct API version. Like I could do advisor score read against any one of the valid API versions. I could do recommendations read against a totally different version. So if you wanted to play around with things like that, you could as well.
Very cool. I have not, I will not lie, with everything I've done, I've not spent a ton of time in here. This is another one I probably won't add to my list to play with right away, but I can definitely see certain scenarios where this is very helpful to go dig through some of that stuff.
Yeah. I still love this tool. Like I don't use it day in, day out, but I can say I use it at least every couple days, depending on what's going on. Like it's another tool in the toolbox when it comes to working with Azure. So whether you're coming at it from that maybe developer lens of I'm just trying to understand what's happening under the hood, or I'm trying to maybe like I'm an ISV and I'm building tooling and I'm using a part of an SDK that doesn't call this REST API method yet. And I want to write my own wrapper for it, something like that. Like this is a great way to do discovery that way. Or if you're just an IT pro and you want to like peek around and see what's going on or be able to run things really quickly, like this is an awesome way to do it.
Right. One of the ones I may even play around with, like some of the deployment stuff too. You showed that I can see from an IT pro standpoint if you want to go in and see some of those templates, flip through all those different deployments that happen within your environment. I can see where digging through those deployments could be super useful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I encourage everybody to go out there and have a play with it. If you have a favorite use for this tool that I haven't talked about here or Ben hasn't questioned me about, then let us know. I'd always love to learn more.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for the tour of the Azure Resource Explorer and the two different
Yeah.
options and what you can do with those two.
No worries. My pleasure.
All right. And I think with that, should we wrap it up? Call it a day, and we'll be
Let's
back
let's
with
do it.
another topic here. I don't know if we'll be back with another stream before Christmas or not. It may end up being after the holidays, January, before we make it back with another one with travel and vacations. So if not, we'll see you in January.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Ben.